Next, we're going to be talking about supply chains with Zack Pattin. He is a member of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, ILWU. Zack, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And sorry it's a little bit later. I got carried away.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, and thanks for jumping on like so early. It's like 8:00 on a Saturday over where you're at on the West Coast. So that's gross. So we've all heard a lot about supply chains lately, and most of us still don't know anything. I would put myself in that category. And talking to you yesterday, preparing for this conversation, you said that you've actually been learning a lot about kind of the bigger picture, even though you've been doing this for years and your father was a longshoreman. So can you kind of help us understand, like, what are some of the narratives that are floating out there, and like, what is the reality on the ground about this supply chain issue?
Sure. Let me just bring up two headlines real quick about just kind of that exemplify some of this trend. One is from the Washington Examiner in October. This headline says, "Lazy crane operators making $250,000 a year, exacerbating port crisis, truckers say." This other one from the New York Post, also in October, says, "To please unions, Biden refuses to automate ports, fueling supply chain woes." So there's this idea that somehow, for lots of different rationales, that what's going on with the supply chain and the backups at the ports is somehow longshore or dock workers' fault, either solely to blame or disproportionately to blame. And I'm here to say otherwise. I don't think that that's true. As soon as you start to like scrutinize those claims, even like a little bit, and just kind of think about like the bigger picture, it's a supply chain. Like the ports and the few West Coast ports, and the port of LA Long Beach in particular isn't the only part of a chain, right? It's got lots of different links. And what's become really, really clear, especially as like a result of this just-in-time shipping model that we have adjusted to with the global economy in the last couple of decades, is that as soon as any number one of those links breaks or weakens, the whole thing falls apart. And so while ports might be among or the like most heavily concentrated nodes or sites of the logistics and shipping industry, they're more visible, especially if you live in a port city, like with those giant hammerhead cranes that define the skyline of places like Seattle, Tacoma, where I live, Los Angeles, Oakland. They're more visible and they're easier to see. And so when you hear all this stuff about how the supply chain is falling apart, I guess it's understandable. You're naturally going to look at the ports. And so then who do you blame is port workers, which is not exclusively dock workers or longshoremen, longshore workers, whatever you want to call us. But it's an easy way out. And I think it also serves other ends as well.
Right. Well, the easy out is certainly being taken by some. And I think that here and in a lot of places, actually, the narrative hasn't gotten out a whole lot, or as much as maybe as you see it being actually a longshoreman. I think that there's just kind of a general, like, what's going on? It's like very mystified, even to like myself, and it's very kind of difficult to understand. But there was an article that you sent me from the LA Times that there was a bit in there that absolutely flabbergasted me, and it was this here, and I'll go ahead and read it. In previous years, those companies, being the shipping companies, had a financial incentive to unload their ships as quickly as possible to free up capacity for more voyages. But the 8 to 10-fold increases in prices, which, before a shipping container cost $2,000 to ship, and now and then it cost $20,000, and now it's like $15,000 or something like that. Mm-hmm. The 8 to 10-fold increases in prices mean that a carrier can double its revenue even at 20% capacity. And with that amount of money coming in, idle ships at ports such as Los Angeles and Long Beach barely scratch the bottom line, and in fact might prove good for business if they mean that the companies can keep prices high. That was bonkers. That, like, I couldn't believe it when I read that, because to the extent that these alternate narratives exist, like, it is focused on the workers, like, oh, the workers, they make too much money, oh, the workers, they don't want to work, oh, the workers, they're keeping people from being hired, but, like, none of that is true. I mean, y'all make good money, but not nearly as much as the bosses make, and you know, especially when you consider the profits that are in this, that they're getting right now. It's huge. They can obviously afford to pay you what you're being paid and more. You have been lobbying. The union has been lobbying for more people to be hired. The union has been lobbying for more people to be hired 24/7 in second and third shifts. And who's not doing that? It's the companies, right?
Right. So one myth I think that's worth addressing is these claims about how that there's a labor shortage on the docks. That's not true. This has died down in the last couple of weeks, but I remember a few weeks or a few months ago, there was lots of people kind of chattering on Twitter about, oh, we need to bring in the National Guard to alleviate congestion on the docks. That's silly for a number of reasons. National Guard, people in the National Guard, soldiers, aren't dock workers. They don't know how to operate this equipment. So if you're trying to move this stuff out of there as quick as possible, you should hire people who actually do it and know how to do it quite well, which is us. But secondly, just that's not like the problem. There's not like a shortage of people to move stuff. There's a shortage of places to move stuff. Like, we're just literally out of room on the terminals. And so this is part of what you were kind of citing about how the cost of a shipping container has jumped up from 2,000 to 20,000. And it's kind of come back down a little bit, but it's still way more than it needs to be and never has been before. The other thing that they're doing, and they're claiming that's because of like the shortages. And so they're forcing like a bidding war between different companies that are trying to ship their products across the Pacific Ocean. So they're extorting and just ruthlessly exploiting like other players in the global economy. But one of the things that, like, the most egregious things that they're doing is this thing called detention fees, where typically if a trucking firm or a truck driver has like a container that they take out, they have a couple of days to get it unloaded at the warehouse or distribution center or wherever they're taking it, and then bring back an empty container that will then stay on the terminal for however long it is until it gets reloaded onto a ship and send it back to China or Japan or wherever it's going, right? If you hold on to that can for too long, you get like a late fee, like the way that you used to for like a movie at Blockbuster, right? Now what's happening is the terminals are so backed up that there's nowhere to bring in an empty container. There's just literally no room. And so that truck driver will get turned away, and they like are not allowed to return it by the terminal operator, many of whom are actually directly owned by the shipping companies themselves. And then they fine them anyway. And they hit these guys with like a detention fee for a can that they're trying to return and did return on time if we would have been accepted. And so now they're making additional prices off of that. That LA Times story does a great job of covering just all the different ways that these shipping companies have found new ways to make profit, which is not through effectively and speedily moving cargo. Typically, profits are found entirely in like what we call turnaround time in the industry. Like, a ship doesn't make any money when it's sitting at anchor, sitting at the dock. The faster it gets unloaded and reloaded with new cargo and then it's on to the next port, that's where all the profits are found. But now that there's all these snarls and hangups in the supply chain, they've found other ways to make new money. And more than they ever have in their entire history. Is like, there's been reports that have shown that just in like the third quarter, the entire shipping industry has bumped up to, I think, like $48 billion in profits. CMA CGM, which is a French-based carrier, in the third quarter this year compared to last year, had a bump from 567 million to 5.6 billion in just 1 year's time. And that previous third quarter was also like one of their best on record as well. So they're making more money than they ever have, just like unfathomable riches. And so, you know, I think people should be suspect and critical about a lot of the dominant narratives that are out there, which are pointing fingers in the wrong direction.
Right. That was another thing that really, the fact that truckers are being charged detention fees for not giving a shipping company shipping containers that they won't take. I mean, that was insane. Like, how is that even legal?
I don't know. That's a good question. It shouldn't be.
I mean, oh wow, that's and so one of the things that that has come up is that y'all's negotiations for your contract is going to be up this summer, I believe. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And the companies are asking you to extend your extension of the contract. You had already extended your contract to appease the companies, and they're asking you to extend that extension, and the union has said no. The workers have said no, we're not going to do that. We're going to go into negotiations, and we're going to get a new contract. Explain to us why the companies want to extend the extension and why that's not a good deal for workers or consumers.
Sure. I'll just say real quick, I'm not an officer or like an elected representative or spokesperson for the union, so I don't want to get too much into kind of internal ILWU business. This is all just out in the open, though, but so I'll just kind of cover that. But so, yeah, the ILWU contract with the Pacific Maritime Association, or the PMA, which is a group that represents all the different shipping and stevedoring companies at all 29 ports on the West Coast. It covers about, I think, 22,000 full and part-time dock workers at all of those ports. So it's a master industry agreement. We don't negotiate port by port or company by company. That expires on July 1st of 2022. Like you said, we're currently on a 3-year extension that we voted on, I think, in 2018. That's already on top of a 5-year contract. That 5-year agreement is longer than we typically negotiate in the first place. And so having a 3-year extension on top of that is absolutely unprecedented in our 80-plus year long history as the ILWU. And now the shipping companies want an additional 1-year extension off of that. And they say that it's because negotiations are going to come with slowdowns and it's going to jeopardize like an already hurting economy and blah, blah, blah. They have like their excuses. And so they're trying to get us to take an extension, even though we have lots of unresolved issues that dock workers have wanted to address for several years. Our international president, Willie Adams, actually comes out of my local, out of Tacoma, Washington. He's in San Francisco now. Wrote like a really good, strongly worded letter back to the PMA about why we need to negotiate, and specifically pointing out that a big part of this problem, I don't like the framing that there's been like labor shortages in like other parts of the industry. Like there's a good article that just came out the other day that there's not like a trucker shortage. There's a wage shortage. There's a shortage of like good conditions. But Willie pointed out in this letter, making quite clear to the PMA that, maybe if other jobs in the supply chain were better, if these other workers like at an Amazon fulfillment center or a port trucker had a union and had access to collective bargaining, these jobs would be a lot better and you wouldn't have such a hard time filling them, and people would dedicate to themselves to sticking out and working these jobs because they wouldn't be such miserable poverty jobs. And so we're not going to pass up on that and lower the bar for these shipping companies just to make even a couple more $1 billion. So it's a unanimous no from like every single corner of the ILW's longshore division that no, the union's not going to take an extension and we're going to go into bargaining in a couple months.
Yeah, and that's been and that's borne out, like the fact that there's, it's not really a labor shortage in these other supply chain industries. It's a compensation and good job shortage. In a couple of different ways. So one, we can see that UPS has not had an issue with labor shortages nearly like their competitors because they pay literally almost twice as much as their competitors like FedEx and Amazon. And as a result of that higher compensation, which is a result of collective bargaining by the Teamsters, they've been able to keep their positions filled, and their on-time delivery rate has stayed basically the same, while FedEx and Amazon has like plummeted. The same can be said for the Postal Service. And then if we look at truck drivers, the average compensation for truck drivers over the past, I saw a graph that was just mind-blowing the other day. It showed like a 50% decrease in compensation for truck drivers over the past 50 years in real dollars. Like when you adjust for inflation, they're making 50% less than they used to, which is insane and makes sense that people don't want to be truck drivers if they're making 50% less than they used to, and they're in an industry that people are constantly saying is going to be automated away in 5 or 10 years. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to spend time training yourself in a job where you get paid like crap? You have to take on all this debt in a lot of cases because you're quote unquote an independent contractor and you've got to buy this $100,000-$200,000 machine that you'll maybe never be able to pay off or have that debt for years, not get compensated well, and then be out of a job in 5 or 10, 15 years. It's just not a good deal for people. And so they are not taking that deal, and now companies are saying, oh, no, it's the workers' fault, and of course it's not. You mentioned something in the contract negotiations, about the contract negotiations, which I feel is a good place to wrap it up, which is that the company is worried they don't have the leverage that they used to. And that ties into a point you made on Twitter the other day, that compensation and wages is not based on, whatever people like to think it's based on, merit or ingenuity or how hard you work or things like this. I mean, of course, to some extent, maybe we can say that those things are factors. But the biggest factor is power and leverage, right? And because of the power and leverage that dock workers have through, one, their important position in the logistics chain, and also through the solidarity that they have formed over the 80 years of the union being a thing, they have been able to negotiate good contracts, and we are going to see you negotiate a good contract this summer. Talk to us about why it is that power and leverage and collective bargaining is actually like a more important determinant of how much you make than like how hard you work.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I'll just kind of decouple this from talking about like ports. And I think this is just a good point about like workers and unions and the labor movement in general. Here's a great example. Like if hard work is like how you got rich, like why are farm workers poor? Right. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, and you could go on down the list and look at every,
or the importance of the job. How important is farm work? That's incredibly important. It's more important than like most of the BS jobs that people have sitting on a computer.
Yeah. If we don't have food, like we're all going to die. Like that is like the most, like that's the most important work. And it's degraded and undignified. And like you think about all like the horrible, like racist stereotypes that are deeply embedded in U.S. society about how we talk about farm workers, about how the way that there's federal labor legislation has carve-outs to deliberately not protect farm workers and so on and so forth. So like, and everybody knows that like working in a field is much harder work than just about most anything you could imagine. And this is work that is like not in turn like valued by our society. But what I wanted to say about kind of this question about power and leverage and unions is a lot of the times like the more conventional kind of mainstream like appeal that union advocates or union organizers will make is they'll say like, unions give workers a voice, they give workers a seat at the table. Those things are true. I'm not disputing that. I don't think that that's actually what's like the most important thing about unions. And I think it also runs the risk of like misunderstanding what's actually at stake is that unions, workers coming together as a group is about power. The boss has it when you don't have a union. And so they're able to dictate the terms and conditions of your employment, typically running their workplaces like a dictatorship where everything comes from the top down. That's another thing too. It's like, we got to talk about this. Like in the United States, we always love to clamor on about like, oh, I got my rights. Like this is a democracy, blah, 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 blah. Workplaces are like the most undemocratic place in like U.S. society. You check all of your rights at the door when you go to work and you take orders from the top down. Like they're deeply like, they're just not like not democratic. They're anti-democratic institutions. And it's because workers don't have power. And that's exactly like what unions are about, is actually like building power for workers so they can check that otherwise unchecked power of their bosses and make changes in the workplace. And so I think, again, it's like, yes, that does give you like a seat at the table, like the bargaining table. It does give you like a voice. But even if you have those two things, but still don't actually have any real power, like I don't really know what good that actually is. And so, and anyway, specifically to your question about ports, there's like a popular term that gets talked about like choke points, right? That certain kinds of workers have particular leverage just by the nature of the industry or the workplace that they work in. And so the reason that dock workers get paid really well in the US isn't because our employers are nice and they care about us. And it's not even because we like work really hard or that our job is dangerous. Both of those things are definitely true. So we absolutely should get paid well. But the reason that we do is because we've organized and fought. So I know you're reading Harvey Schwartz's Solidarity Stories right now, like, and other people who know our history know that people died literally fighting for the things that we have. 6 people were murdered in 1934 for us to like win union recognition. And so it's through struggle and through power. Right. And we've been able to maintain that. And I don't think that we or any other worker who has it, even if it's just a little bit of power, should forfeit that for any reason.
Exactly. And I have finished, I finished a few weeks ago, Solidarity Stories by Harvey Schwartz. I would highly recommend people check that out. I don't know if you can buy it online anymore or where you would buy it, but it's good. It's really good. It's a collection of interviews with ILWU members from the 30s on through the 2000s. It's a fascinating read, and I always love hearing from normal people, like working people. Even, of course, I like to talk to people in leadership with unions, and I like to hear from people in leadership with unions, especially when they come from the rank and file, as most union leaders do. But I love hearing from people who actually do the job day in and day out. And that's a really cool thing about Solidarity Stories, is you talk to like normal ass folks who do longshore work, and you get to hear what they say. And that's something that the media in this country doesn't do enough of. They really prize people who have these fancy titles and all the BS that comes with that. And it's not warranted, the respect that these people have because they have these fancy titles or because they make a lot of money. Maybe the argument could be made that they deserve less respect, in fact. So Zach, do you have anything else to, or Adam, did you want to ask Zach anything before we let him go?
No, I just wanted to say I thought that was an excellent discussion, and I really appreciate your emphasis on power. And I think that's something that, you've echoed a lot of the common themes we have on this show in our discussion of how anti-democratic our workplaces are and how labor movement politics is first and foremost about building power and adjusting the balance of power we have in our society and our economy. So great stuff, Zach. Really excited that you came on and shared with us. Love to hear from folks who are on the ground. And, it's kind of helped me to understand this supply chain issue that we're all talking about and dealing with in the stores. So thanks for that. And make sure you plug anything you have to plug today so folks can check you out and keep tabs on you.
Thank you. I will make one plug on the point about power for workers. I got to give a shout out to my friend. I think you guys know him too, but Professor Peter Cole, and his book, Dock Worker Power, which really explores this concept. It's a comparative history of the Dockers Union in South Africa and the ILWU here on the U.S. West Coast, specifically Local 10 in the San Francisco Bay Area. But it's if you want to hear more about this kind of question about containerization and automation and what that has to do with power, in this case for like bosses, and like the political kind of angle about why employers want to automate longshoremen out of existence. It's not because it's more efficient. It's not because it's more effective. It's fundamentally about power. And Peter's book shows that the West Coast was a testing ground for that new technology when it was first introduced in the 1950s. But it also does a great job of covering our social and political history and talking about all the many different things that the ILWU has done to use our leverage and use our power to build solidarity and help build power for other workers here in the United States, like supporting Dr. King and the civil rights movement, to boycotting South African cargo in the 70s and 80s to help topple the apartheid regime and get Nelson Mandela and South Africa free. But anyway, so that's Dock Worker Power. You can get that from the University of Illinois Press by Professor Peter Cole. You should follow him on Twitter too. Great guy, great scholar. And I think really taps into kind of like these larger discussions, both about making sense about what's happening in the supply chain too, but also about like why unions really matter, which is about power and democracy.
Thanks for talking to us, Zach. I appreciate that. I believe MLK was an honorary member of the ILWU. Isn't that right? That's right. He was sworn in by Local 10 in, I think, September of 1967, just a few months before he was assassinated on a picket line with striking sanitation workers. Cool as hell. Thanks for talking to us, Zack Pattin, a member of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, ILWU. You can check him out on Twitter at ZackPattin_, ZackPattin_. Support for this program comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.